I've been having several conversations over the last couple of weeks with folks that I travel with spiritually, and with colleagues and friends. And each one of them, a theme of transition continues to come out of these conversations. I think of Matthew, who is in the process of transitioning from being a deacon student to being consecrated a deacon in the Lutheran Church, and the excitement and the trepidation and nervousness that comes with that. I think about Roger, who is transitioning through some pretty hefty health issues, and what that means for him and his family and his future. I think about a spiritual direction student that I've been traveling with and supervising, who is on the cusp of transitioning from being a student to being recognized as a spiritual director, and the nervousness that she feels with that, and living deeply into a calling that she's known for quite some time. And finally, a clergy person that I've been traveling with, who is in the midst of transition within a congregation, and not quite sure what that means for her or the people that she has loved and walked with for quite some time. Indeed, transitions are all around us. During the month of April, all we need to do is look outside our window and see the transition of weather that's constantly happening during this month. We have had transitions of people from life to death into the next life eternal. Dorothy, James Mobley, who was the first black ordained man deacon in our diocese here. His life was celebrated yesterday at the cathedral. And I think about a colleague, friend of mine, whose 22-year-old son died last week from a drug overdose, and the transition that family is facing in not only the death of their son, but dealing yet with another tragedy of the ongoing opioid crisis in our state. Transitions continue all across the spectrum. COVID-19, we constantly are experiencing transition there, from going yellow to orange to red to purple, back to red, back to purple and orange, and all that means for our community in COVID. The transition of vaccine, and the availability, and which ones are available, and how do we get that, and all that means for us in our communities and our lives of working and living with folks who are vaccinated and those who choose not to be vaccinated. In my own work life, dealing with the transition now of, do I bring people back into the office, or do I continue to allow people to work at home? The transition of needing to bring in new staff people to fill the demand that Cohio is facing with the work that is in front of us. And the continued transition of working with organizations across the state, of helping to bring people out of hotels and motels where we had them safely sheltered during the last year into more permanent, stable, sustainable, long-term housing. Our world and communities continue to face transition every day. We read about in the news. Violence continues. Mass murders are happening. Are we going to open our businesses? Are we going to continue with restrictions? How are we going to face the continuing transition that we are facing as a nation with racial injustice? And globally, all that is happening with war and famine and natural disaster, and the transitions that happen every day that we're not even aware of. And within our own church, the transitions that we face now with finding a bishop who can lead us into whatever is next for our diocese. The transition that our congregations are facing with having empty buildings for the last year. And what does that mean for us as a church? A question that St. Matthew's, thankfully, has worked its way through and knows how to maneuver through that particular transition. I think about the numerous clergy that I work with and talk to that are facing transition not only in our Episcopal diocese, but in denominations and Episcopal dioceses across the country. Retirement, moving from maybe assistant to rector, or other types of bivocational, which I don't even like that word, can't believe it came out of my mouth, but being multitasking perhaps as clergy, something that my priest colleagues could probably look to the diaconate to learn a little bit more about. That's a whole other sermon. I'm going to leave that one to the side. And you and I, of course, have our own transitions that we're dealing with our family, our friends, and in our lives, in our homes, in our neighborhoods. Whatever those are, indeed, our lives are full of transitions all the time. And I don't know about you, but that makes it hard for me to stay focused. Because with transition comes all kinds of emotion. Whether it's anxiety, depression, grief, joy, excitement, dealing with the unknown, re-socializing, new socializing, and the trepidation that comes with who we gather with and who we don't. It makes it hard to deal with transition. But transition is a very real part of our life. So what do we do? Thankfully, our lessons this morning give us some important tips and lessons on how to maneuver through the transitions that happen in our life. If we look to the psalm this morning, Psalm 4 has an all-familiar phrase that we've heard throughout this year of pandemic and isolation. Oh, that we might see better times. It's somewhat comforting for me that our ancestors uttered that often themselves. Oh, that we might see better times. Things were better back then. The good old days. When can we turn to what was normal? I don't even know what that means, normal. But that sentiment of, oh, that we might see better times, is something very familiar with me. The anguish of the past year makes us feel like we have been trapped, encircled by demons, no place to go. What do we do? But the psalm also gives us a hint of how to deal with that. For we hear that when we are hard-pressed, God will set us free. And I don't know about you, but I have indeed felt hard-pressed over the last year. And turning to God, knowing that God is there, certainly has given me the freedom to move from day to day, and sometimes even hour to hour. The psalm continues with knowing that the Lord does wonders for the faithful, which is a helpful reminder that all I need to do is call on God, and God will be there. God will hear, and God will help me find a way through those difficult transitions of my life. As we turn to Luke in the Gospel, in my own little twisted, humorous way, I hear this as a Saturday Night Live skit or a Monty Python skit. We start with this Gospel and Jesus showing up amongst the disciples. But just before this, we know that the disciples are gathered, and they're already talking about their experiences of seeing Jesus, but they don't quite believe it. And then all of a sudden, holy Toledo, there's Jesus in the middle of them. And they're freaked out. They don't know what to do. They are disbelieving. They are startled and terrified. But Jesus, in his calming way, says to them, dudes, calm down. It's me, Jesus. And he has to literally help them understand and wrap their head around the fact that it is indeed Jesus. He shows them their hands. He shows them his feet. And he says, it's me, trust me. It's okay. But in their doubt and startledness, they still don't understand it. And again, in my own little humorous way, they totally forget their manners. Insomuch that Jesus has to say, excuse me, you got anything to eat? I mean, they don't even have an hors d'oeuvre set out for Jesus. But they do find a piece of broiled fish. Well, isn't that exciting? A piece of broiled fish. It's the best that they can do for their risen Lord. But despite that, Jesus takes that fish and he eats it in their presence. Such a simple act to demonstrate that he is indeed, truly human, and has come back and is with them and will be with them. It's another way of showing the disciples that even in their doubts, Jesus is there and is real. And in those final closing words of that section of the gospel, Jesus opens their minds so that they can understand what is really happening around them. This is significant. Last week in the gospel, we heard that Jesus breathed the Spirit on them, and they understood. In this gospel from Luke, Jesus opens their minds. It's an important piece to remember that is what we need to rely on Jesus to do, is open our minds. Friends and colleagues of mine often ask me about my faith. They don't quite understand how I can be a Christian and do the work that I do and believe. And for me, it's simple. The Lord does wonders for the faithful. Peace be with you. Opening my mind. All of these are ways that I demonstrate God's command to love my neighbor and love myself. My mind has been and truly open and continually leads to Jesus' message of love. Now, don't get me wrong, it is not easy to do that, but I know that when I can accomplish that, my faith truly does produce wonderful accomplishments. And in my own doubts, and I do have them often, I'm reminded that I am God's child, much like we hear in 1 John today, and that I am still waiting to be revealed, and that all I need to do is live in this moment and be faithful. God will reveal in God's time. I don't need to worry about that. Neither do you. I know that when I am hard pressed, that freedom comes from God, who will lead me into rest and deep contemplation. But I have to repent, turn, metanoia, and know that God is there and will forgive me and help me. It is for all of these reasons that I know it's time for me to enter into a period of transition. Next Sunday will be my last Sunday with you all for the next 4 months, through prayer and deep contemplation, and after feeling hard-pressed for quite some time, it is time for me to take a rest, and to be a child of God, and to simply be still and know that what is yet to be will be revealed in God's good time. I will be praying for you all. I know that you all will be praying for me. Not going anywhere in particular, but at this time of rest is deeply needed. And so God has said, "Child, go and be still." And so I shall. I encourage all of you to think about, in these times of transitions, what is God calling you to? Are you listening? Are you even aware? And let me remind you, friends, that it is okay to still be disbelieving and wondering, to be startled and terrified. These are normal human emotions that God has given us. So be in those times, but also be aware that I hope that you don't fail to see Jesus in front of you. The Jesus who is eating a simple piece of broiled fish and who is waiting to open your mind.